Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. I'm going to be reading a particular book tonight. Actually, I've been reading a particular book here from a gentleman named Kersey Graves. The book's title is called The World's 16 Crucified Saviors. So my channel is Discerning What is True, and today is the 28th day of February 2024. So approximately now within the next day, it will be 2 months. 2 months have gone by for the month of February, year of 2024. So I'm going to be reading this particular book. It's a chapter, I should say, and it's not that long. And thank you for being here. And so let's get to the book here. Hold on just a second. So this is chapter 15, The World's 16 Crucified Saviors. And it's called The Saviors Were Real Purchases. In other words, they were real, according to what he's sharing. So it is unwarrantable, assumed by Christian writers, that the incarnate God, says capital G, and crucified saviors, the S is also capitalized, of the pagan religions, that is, were all either mere fabulous characters or ordinary human beings invested with divine titles and divine attributes, while on the other hand, the assumption is put forth with equal boldness that Jesus Christ was a real divine personage, quote, seen and believed in the world, and finally crucified on Mount Calvary, end quote. But we do not find the facts in history to warrant any such assumptions or any such distinctions. They all stand in this respect upon the same ground and on equal footing. And their respected disciples point to the same kind of evidence to prove their real existence and their divine character, and to prove that they once walked and talked amongst men, as well as now sit on the eternal throne in heaven. Quote, at the right hand of the Father, end quote. I wonder, they say that. I wonder simply is what's on the left hand of the Father. Interesting. I have to ask, maybe I have to ask Phil Langdon that question. It's kind of interesting. And we find even Christian writers admitting the once bona fide or personal existence on earth of most of the pagan saviors. As to the two chief incarnated gods of India, that is Krishna and Sakya, there is scarcely, quote, a peg left to hang a doubt upon, end quote, as to the fact of their having descended to the earth, taking upon themselves the form of men, and having been worshipped as veritable gods. Indeed, we believe but few of the missionaries who have visited that country question the statements and general beliefs prevalent there of their once personal reality. Colonel Todd, in his work called History of the Rajas, page 44, states, we must discard the idea that the Mahabharata, the history of Rama, of Krishna, and the five Paduta brothers are mere allegories, colossal figures. Ancient temples and caves inscribed with characters yet unknown confirm the reality, and their race, their cities, and their coins yet exist, end quote. To argue further the personal reality of the crucified God would be a waste of words, as it is generally admitted both by historical writers and missionaries. Mr. Higgins declared, quote, Krishna lived at the conclusion of the Brazen Age, which is calculated to have been 1100 or 1200 years before Christ. So this would be approximately 3200 years ago, or 3100 years ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. Quote, here is a very positive, specific declaration as to his tangible actuality. Colonel Dow, D-O-W, Mr. Robinson, and others use similar language. Relative to Bacchus, B-A-C-C-H-U-S, whose history many writers have spoken of, and being wholly fabulous or fictitious, Theodorus Siculus says in LIB 3, page 137. I don't know what LIB is here. Sorry. The quote, the Libyans claim Bacchus and said that he was the son of Ammon, a king of Libya, that he built a temple to his father Ammoron, end quote. And that worldwide famous historian, quote, Mr. Goodrich, is still more explicit, if possible, as to his material entity. After giving it directly as his opinion that there was such a being, he says, quote, he planted vineyards and fig trees and erected many noble cities, end quote. He moreover tells us, quote, his skill in legislation and agriculture is much praised, end quote. This is in his book called, a page that is in page 499. With respect to Osiris of Egypt, another god savior, Mr. Hilton, Hittle, declares unqualifiably that, quote, Herodias saw the tomb of Osiris at Sais, S-A-I-S, nearly 5 centuries before Christ, end quote. That's in volume 1, page 246. Rather, a strong evidence of his previous personality, certainly, but not more so than that furnished by the New York Journal of Commerce a few years later, or I should say a few years since, relative to the Egyptian Apis or Thols, whose theophanity was annually celebrated at the rising of the Nile with great festivals and devotions several thousand years ago. The Paris correspondent of that journal, after speaking of Mr. Auguste Marietta, who had travels, makes a quote here, a distinguished scientific gentleman who for 4 years past has been employed by the French government in making Egyptian researches, end quote. And having returned home, says the most important of Mr. Marietta's discoveries was the tomb of Apis, A-P-I-S, or Thols, T-H-U-L-I-S, a monument excavated entirely in lime rock. Quote, there are, quote, not quote, in brackets, I should say, he says in a conclusion, in bracket, epitaphs forming a chronological record of each of the apes buried in the common tomb. The sculpture is of a date of the pyramids, and the statues are in the best state of preservation. The colors are perfectly bright, the execution is admirable, and they convey an exact idea of the physical character of the primitive population, end quote. The New American Encyclopedia, that is an art, Apis, A-P-I-S, in brackets, and speaking of this Egyptian god, tells us his lifetime was 25 years, in harmony with one of the theologians' astronomical cycles of the Egyptians. The same work and volume, that is in page 132, in speaking of the real existence of Ananias of Greece, tells us upon the authority of the poet Panaetus, that he was a veritable son of Theus, king of Syria. But all the characters who figured in this, all the figures who have figured in this mythology works are lawless rhapsodies of the ancients and worshipped by them as crucified gods and sin atoning saviors. None has perhaps been so indelibly, so positively, and so universally set down as mythology or fabulously as that of Prometheus of Chalcedon. And yet, Mr. Limprize, a doctrine of divinity, I see here, tells us in the classic dictionary that he was the son of Japetus, Japetus. Sir Isaac Newton said he was a descendant of the famous African Sosotrius. While that erudite and mastery historian, that is Mr. Higgins, seems to have entertained no doubt of the personal case, nor indeed of many, if any, of the pagan saviors, as the following declaration will show. He says, quote, finding men in India and other countries of the same name of the inferior gods, that's in capital G, and then it has it in brackets as it is quite common to some to name men for them in bracket has led has led some to conclude that these deified men never existed, but are merely mythological names of the sun. True, the first supreme God of every nation, and it's in brackets, not accepting the Jews, then in bracket was the Sun, S-U-N. But more moderately, the names were transferred to men, end quote. Again, he says, inasmuch as some of them are found to have been real bona fide human beings, there is nothing unreasonable in concluding that all were, end quote. And if we take into consideration the true and indisputable fact that the priests had everything at their disposal and the strongest motive for concealing and suppressing, not to say garbing and destroying evidence, it is not to be wonder at that the histories of some of these gods should be somewhat obscure and ambiguous. Further on, he declares, quote, in every case the Savior was incarnate, and nearly every case the place in which he was actually born was exhibited to the people, end quote. And upon the authority of the Hierophant, we will add the memories of many of them have been consecrated and perpetually by tombs placed beside their temples, which is perhaps the most convincing species of evidence that could be offered. The evidence then is precisely of the same character as that offered in the case of Jesus Christ, to prove that the pagan saviors did really possess a substantial earthly and bodily existence, though it is true that it never has been universally concealed or believed by Christians themselves that Jesus Christ ever had a personal or a corporate existence on earth. Cotilius, in a note on Ignatius, that is, epistle to the Trallians, Trallians, written in the 3rd century of the Christian era, declared that, quote, it is absurd to deny the doctrine which taught that Jesus Christ's body was a phantom, as to deny that the sun, S-U-N, shone at midday, end quote. His physical body, of course, was meant, for it appears that he believed in his eternal existence as a spirit in heaven. And we find whole sects that is advocating similar views in the early age of the Christian church. Quote, one of the most primitive and learned sects, end quote, says a writer, were the Manichaeans, who denied that Jesus Christ ever existed in flesh and blood, but believed him to be a God in spirit only. Others denied him to be a God, that is a capital G, but believed him to have been a prophet or inspired character, that is, like the Unitarians of the present day. Some denied his crucifixion, others asserted it. It is more than probable that this was the cause of dispute between Paul and Barnabas. Mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles, seeing that Paul had laid such peculiar emphasis on, quote, Jesus Christ and him crucified, end quote. And this conclusion is corroborated by as being expressly stated in the Gospel of Barnabas that, quote, Jesus Christ was not crucified, but was carried to heaven by 4 angels, end quote. It'd be interesting to find out also simply what the 4 angels mean here in this passage. Quote, there was a long list, end quote, says the same writer, quote, from the earliest times of sincere Christians who denied that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, end quote, while, as we may remark here, there could not have been at that early date any grounds for denying these things, had he really figured in the world in the miraculous and extraordinary and public manner as they related in the Gospels. And that's the conclusion of chapter 15 tonight. Thank you for being here. And hope that this has some. So I have a hello, John. How you doing? Good to see you. Um, I hope that this may help you see some things here. John, appreciate you being here. I'm going to be sharing probably in a few more minutes another particular chapter in this book, Kersey Graves, which will be chapter 17, I think it will be. Yeah, 17, and I'll be sharing that shortly. Thank you for sharing your information, John. You're welcome to come back and share what you have to say. Okay? Thank you. So we're going to cut it off here, and then we're going to come back probably in a few minutes and take a break, and then I'll do another particular chapter of this particular book, also the world's 16 crucified saviors. Thank you.